All right. We've been studying the book of James, and last week we were talking about that subject that makes us all uncomfortable, our tongues, and how difficult it is to control our tongues. In James chapter 3, where he talks about the tongue, and he tells them after this speech about the tongue, that the same tongue shouldn't be blessing and cursing. And then he goes into this section, which is very much connected, talking about wisdom. And I think this begins with verse 13 in chapter 3. Who is wise among you? Okay. So he begins to talk about the wisdom that we have. Now remember, in James chapter 1, verse 5 or so, he says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask from God. But if you don't want God's wisdom, don't ask. Well, God's wisdom, as we've seen it in the book of James, is love your neighbor as yourself. And, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's God's wisdom. But James is going to tell us that there are two types of wisdom. He says there's the wisdom that comes from God, and there's the wisdom that comes from the devil. And we have different types of wisdom coming at us from all different directions today, different types of influences or stimuli, you might say, that are coming at us, some good, some bad, from all different sources. All right? So who is the real wise person among us, and what would such a wise person who was wise in the ways of God, what would they do? More than that, what would they lead others to do? By their speech, by their actions. You remember James says, be doers of the word and not hearers only. And in the context, he's saying, in the context of relationships, in the context of having conflicts with other people, he says, be doers of the word. Actually put your faith into action in what you say and what you do. So who is wise among you? He says that our words betray two different kinds of wisdom. One kind is from the devil. He actually uses the word demonic in the Greek text. He says one type of wisdom is demonic. It comes from the demons and the influence of the demons. The other type of wisdom is from God. Which type of wisdom do you have? Wisdom is an interesting word. Have you ever heard the word sophist, S-O-P-H-I-S-T? Of course you have. It means one who explores various worldviews or philosophies, or to put it a different way, different kinds of wisdom. So basically, one's worldview, you could say it this way, one's modus operandi for living life is one's wisdom. So in our head, we all have a way of going about our life, a way of looking at the world, a way in which we make decisions. That is our wisdom. Okay? What kind of wisdom do you have? Let's see what James says. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct. See, wisdom comes out in conduct. Now, conduct is the way we talk and the way we act. Okay? The way we talk and the way we act. Our behavior is our conduct, okay? So who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works. Now, see, we want to get off into theological discussions when we talk about works. Read that as deeds or actions, okay? So the good conduct and the works or deeds or actions that he's talking about here, behavior, if you will, that's how we show the wisdom that is at work in our minds, see? The mind comes first, the behavior results from the mind. Are you with me? Okay. So, if you're really wise in godly wisdom, let your conduct reflect that wisdom. How can we claim that we have that wisdom if our conduct says something different? Do you see? And will people respect us for godly wisdom if our conduct is otherwise? No, they'll see hypocrisy, in us. So he says, by his good conduct, let him show by his works or deeds or actions in the gentleness of wisdom. Some of your translations will say meekness. Meekness doesn't mean milquetoastness. Proutes, meekness, is gentleness. It's strength that is gentle. Being gentle in our dealings with other people. He comes back to this later in this chapter. So who is wise among you? You can determine that by the deeds, the conduct, the gentleness of that wisdom. But, this is on the contrary, but if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart. The word heart is misunderstood by us today in the way it's used. See, you can think of your blood pumper, but in the Bible, when it speaks of your heart, it's talking about your mind. As a man thinketh in his heart. See? The thoughts of the heart. You with me? You don't think from here, you think from here. But anyway, it's called the heart. It's the thinking, willing, processing part of man. That's your heart. Okay? So if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, that bespeaks a type of wisdom in the sense of a way of operating in the world. I'm operating in the world through selfishness. I'm operating in the world through a sense of competition and jealousy with others and how I might be shown to be better than others. See, this is really a philosophy of operating in life that we're talking about. So he says, if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. So the boasting is ways in which I am superior to you, or ways in which I'm better than you, ways in which I'm compare in a superior way to you. See, that's this kind of wisdom. All right, he says this is not wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthy or earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. All right, so what we're going to do in the next few minutes is we're going to digest that passage a little bit. And we'll go ahead and read this. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, if you'll look back up at verse 14, you'll see that jealousy and selfish ambition are in your heart. So he says here, if jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. So he's talking about this is the fruit or the result of that kind of operational philosophy in people's lives. What does it produce, in other words? It produces all that stuff. Disorder in every vile practice or deed. But the wisdom from above. See, now notice the wisdom from above in verse 17 is contrasted with verse 15, where he said that wisdom is earthy or earthly, sensual, and demonic. See? So we've got two kinds of wisdom going on here. So the wisdom that comes down from above is pure, then peaceable, gentle. Now that word gentle is the same as meek or meekness or gentleness up above. Open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. A harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Well, if you're going to harvest something, what did you do long before you harvested it? You planted it. Okay? Now think back to James 1:19 and following. He says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to be angry, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. See? So you can't get a harvest of righteousness by sowing jealousy and anger, can you? It doesn't work that way. So he's operating on the principle of what you sow in other people in your relationships, you reap from those what you sow. All right? So then he says, a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. All right, so let's talk for a minute about worldly wisdom. He or she did it to me, I need to do it back to them. You know, how could they possibly do that? They need to be punished for what they did. I mean, we can go on and talk about worldly wisdom and what we hear in our ears from all kinds of quarters. But worldly wisdom arises from jealousy and selfish ambition. And we all have to watch selfishness in ourselves, right? Selfishness is a part of a nature of man that has to be gone against, selfishness. Okay? It's earthly. Now, earthly doesn't sound that bad. Are you alien or are you earthly? You know, but earthly means the opposite of spiritual. See, it's the word actually that's used oftentimes to talk, like in 1 Corinthians 2:14, the carnal man or the natural man does not accept the things of the Spirit of God. That's the same word as in here. Earthly, natural, unspiritual. Some might even translate that way. But then he says unspiritual or sensual. This word means that instead of being directed by the Spirit, it's directed by the flesh. See, it's unspiritual. Think of Romans 8:7. The mind of the flesh is enmity against God. It is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can it be. But you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. But see, the Spirit of God lives in us through our conduct. Through our conduct, which means our heart, our mind has been changed. See? So it's unspiritual, it's demonic, he says. He actually uses the word for demon in this passage in the Greek text. It's, some of yours may say devilish, same difference, but it's not the word devil, it's the word demon. It's demonic. Okay? Demons work in this world. So says the Bible. They work on our minds, in our hearts. 1 Timothy 4 talks about doctrines of demons, teachings of demons. 1 John 4, brothers, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see if they are from God, for there are many false prophets that are gone out into the world. So the demons work on our hearts to persuade us, to convince us, to shape us, to have a demonic way of operating, a demonic philosophy for going about life in the world. At the same time, God would work on us. See? So who are you allowing to work on you? Okay? So the wisdom of the world is all around us. It's in our ear every single day. We have friends that are giving it to us. We have family members that give us the wisdom of the world. But you have to understand that it is earthly, it is unspiritual, it is demonic. But in the book of James, in the first chapter, he says, I know you're going through these struggles, but if you want wisdom, ask who? God. Well, if you ask God, if you go to His Word, you're going to get the wisdom that comes down from above. All right, so let's examine here for a minute the wisdom that comes down from above. By the way, at the bottom here, those things bear the fruit, according to the earlier section, of disorder and every vile deed. People do bad things to each other, if that's the way they are. But the wisdom that comes from God is. I thought these were worth exploring. It's pure. The word is very close to the word holy. It's pure. There's nothing evil in it. It's peaceable, peace-loving. It loves to make peace. See, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Again, it is gentle. Now, see, we can be firm but gentle. We don't have to be mean or ugly. No matter what the situation is, we can be gentle. A soft answer turns away wrath. We can be gentle. We can be kind. That's this kind of wisdom. It's open to reason. I think some translations say easy to be entreated. Easy to be entreated. In other words, instead of just yelling or insisting on our point of view and our way, and we're talking here about a conflict between people of different classes over things that both people want for themselves and so forth. So it's open to reason. Well, I cannot be open to reason unless I'm willing to do what? Listen. So I am in some kind of disagreement or conflict with whoever it might be, but I need to be open to reason. If that's really the case, then I need to listen and try to find out where this other person or these other people are coming from. Okay? Now that's going to impact how we read a passage here in just a minute, in James chapter 4. But if I'm open to reason, a lot of times if we really listen to somebody and they explain to us why they're having an issue and what they really want, and how do you proceed from there, if they explain that, then we understand more where they're coming from, and we might say, well, I didn't realize you were feeling that way. I didn't really realize that was what was on your mind. I didn't really realize that is what you really wanted. Okay? But we won't unless we listen. So, divine wisdom, developing positive Christian relationships, is willing to listen and consider and clarify what other people are really wanting or thinking or what's really bothering them. Many times we respond through emotions at what we tell ourselves is a situation, and we don't know what's really in that other person's heart or mind unless we have an opportunity to listen. Now, how many of us, do we tend to embrace conflict or avoid conflict? Yeah, we tend to avoid conflict. Now, conflict is an ugly word to us, and I understand, and it should be, but I'm saying that many times by avoiding a confrontation, and even confrontation sounds bad. I'm not talking about being confrontive. I'm talking about avoiding addressing the issue between us personally. If we avoid that, then we never will get to this reasoning, listening, understanding phase, will we? Because we'll just be puffed up and avoiding conflict. So, rather than avoid it, we need to face it, and we need to be pure, peaceable, gentle, and open to reason. Listen. Okay? Then impartial. Now that's tough. Impartial. Was there anything earlier in James before this about being impartial? Where was it? What? It was in chapter 2 where he says we shouldn't show favoritism. Okay? So this kind of godly wisdom is willing to listen to anybody, regardless of who that person might be on whatever scale you're talking about, whether it's educational or social or political or whatever. We listen to one another. So it's impartial. Okay? Sincere. What does that mean if two people are coming together? What does sincerity mean? How would you describe that if we're sincere and we're coming together, two or more people are coming together to hash out disagreements, what does sincere mean? Somebody help me out here. What's that? Kind, okay. Honest. I'm sorry. Yeah, honest. Thank you very much. So definitely it means honest. All right. Now, good brother that I love told us last week, he said, you can be honest and ugly at the same time. But you can also be honest and kind, can't you? Okay, so honest. What else? Sincerity. Chuck? Yeah. So Chuck's statement is that if you're not really listening and trying to find out what the other person needs or wants, then you're not sincerely into the discussion or conversation or negotiation. You're not negotiating. You've already had your mind made up, and so you're not sincere. Yes? Humble or vulnerable. Okay? Humble or vulnerable. If we can't be vulnerable or open, then that speaks to our sincerity, doesn't it? Because we're being aggressive. That's not really sincere. And sincere means I'm willing to do what if I need to. I'm willing to change if I need to change. And our goal is, especially when we're talking about things in James, it's not to win our case. Our goal is to build a relationship with the other person. Somebody else had their hand up. Barry?
Be sincere means putting others' interests ahead of your own.
All right. His says sincere is putting another person's interest ahead of your own. So if you have the wisdom coming down from above, you're wanting to help that person get what they want as well as what you want. What would we call that in a business situation? Win-win. A win-win situation. That's the most healthy situation for everybody, right? Win-win. Okay? Now, does it have to be 100% win, 100% win? No, it could be partial win here and a partial win here, and we meet each other in the middle, say. But this is where what we're talking about in James is worldly conflicts. And in this case, it was like labor and union, or union and ownership, or it was laborers and workers, or that was the situation in James. But worldly conflicts bleed over into the church because the church contains people that land on both sides of those conflicts. Okay? So, this is it. So impartial and sincere. Don't you think that going down through that list, when I'm approaching this situation, and am I approaching it with pure motives, wanting to be peaceable? Am I determined to be gentle? Am I truly open to reason and willing to listen? Which means being quiet and listening. Am I really impartial? Am I totally sincere? Now if that's the case on both sides, then I believe there's a high likelihood of some kind of a good solution coming out. Now, you might say, in reply to what I just said, let me anticipate something. What would some people say to what I just said if there's these things on both sides? Somebody say it, because I know you're thinking it. I'm just going to stand here. Yeah, so if there's not these things on both sides, if you have insincerity and other stuff on both sides, you may not come out with what you want, but in God's sight, does that give me an excuse not to be all these things? Okay. So, still James would say, as this passage just says in greater detail in James 1:19, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry, because the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. It's kind of frustrating when God's wisdom is so clear and simple, isn't it? And he says, now be doers of the word and not hearers only. And he's talking in this book about, in these situations, actually act like Christians. Let's go back up previously to, whoops, I'm going the wrong way. Verse 13, where we started. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct. Now, what if the other person doesn't conduct themselves well? That doesn't have anything to do with me, right? By his good conduct, let him show his works in gentleness of wisdom. Wow, this is tough. And God says, okay, I know, but if you didn't want this, you shouldn't have asked me for your what? Wisdom. Because I'm giving it to you. All right. Anybody want to weigh in on that part before we progress a little further? If I'm Frank, I missed you last week. Anything you want to add to this? All right, he says if you take the chance actually to have a conversation or discussion, you may find quite a bit of places where you agree, and even if you don't, you can agree to disagree and be agreeable with one another so that you preserve the what? The relationship. Okay, now again, even when we're talking about spiritual things, we want to be able to have influence in the lives of others, right? So we'd be better asking questions, saying, okay, I hear where you're coming from. Here's a passage of scripture you might go and read. Next time we get together, maybe you can tell me what you think about that. And you're still putting godly, biblical things out there, but you're preserving the relationship. Okay? Which if we want to have lasting influence and relationship, then that's what we need to do. Okay, anybody else? Yeah, it's very important that you don't close the door, see? And that's absolutely right. All right, so what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? That's kind of a basic question, isn't it? What causes quarrels? What causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you. Now, your passions here have to do with your baser inclinations and your desires. Passion can be the passion of anger. It can be the passion of pride. It can be the passion of lust or covetousness. It can be passion of all kinds of different things, okay? But they're at war with us. My theory of the soul, which I can't show you a soul because you can't see souls, but my theory of the soul is that the soul is our will at its core, and around the will are our emotions and our intellect. And our emotions are welling up and trying to push us to do stuff, mostly things that we shouldn't do. Our intellect is processing a whole bunch of information, a lot of it bad, some of it good. And all those things are trying to influence our will to act in certain ways. But our will is us. And our will is the part of us that's responsible. And so based on all that, both emotions and intellect, our will makes all these decisions, and these decisions lead to what? Actions or words that come out of our mouth, okay? So it's our will that's responsible to others and to God. That's responsible. So what causes quarrels and fights among you? The passions at war within you. You desire and do not have. Okay, so let's look at this particular case. You have a business owner or a land owner, and this landowner, business owner, farmer, whoever it is, has the desire to be profitable, to take care of his people and his needs and the people that work for him, to hopefully. The people that are working that don't own anything, they have a desire to provide for their families and to meet their needs and so forth. So they both have desires, okay? If those desires are frustrated on either side, you're going to have some degree of conflict, okay? But he says there, you desire and do not have, so you murder. Now, I take that, if you read this whole book, I believe that's literal. I believe that in this worldly conflict that was going on, there were actual people getting killed. See, this was not a nice conflict. And it just so happened that some members of the church were caught up on both sides of this conflict. And James is addressing, okay, how are you going to live out your Christianity in the midst of this conflict? So you desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. Now you see fight and quarrel there. If you go back up to chapter 4, verse 1, what causes quarrels and fights? Well, he says you covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. Now here's the part I just want you to think about. I'm not sure. It's a thought I've been having as I've been restudying this. I'm not sure if this is right or not. But he says, you do not have because you do not ask. Now, the way I've read that for a long time, out of context, basically, is if I ask God, God would give me what I need. I'm rethinking that. You do not have because you do not ask. I'm wondering if he's not saying, you've assumed all these things about the guy on the other side of this conflict, and you're avoiding this confrontation, even fighting with each other, even killing each other. But what you haven't done is gone to the person and done what? Ask for what you really need. Had a sit down with them and say, look, all I really want out of this is this. See? And the only reason I want this is because I need this to, you haven't asked. So I'm just wondering if in the context of James and in this discussion, it could be that we haven't asked for what we want. How are other people going to know if we don't ask? And he says, you ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly. Well, wait a minute. Can we ever go to someone and ask, and without really asking, we demand and we ask wrongly and we make threats and we say, if you don't do this, then I'm going to do that, right? So you ask and don't receive because you ask wrongly, that you may conceive it on your own lust. Do we ever ask for things we don't really need, but things that we want? And even maybe threaten because, so I'm not sure, I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying after reading this through in context, I'm not sure that he's talking about asking God here. He may be talking about asking the people that you're in conflict with. Because I think sometimes if we went up to somebody and we said, look, I know this is a pain, but let me explain to you the situation and let me tell you what I need exactly and why I need it. And then sometimes people would say, you know, I wish I'd known that in the first place because we could have taken care of that no problem. So just consider that in your study. Again, I'm not sure that's correct. I'm just thinking on it. But you're supposed to know. Sometimes I don't. Yes? The of God is not in Greek. No. No. Somebody else. Janice, you had a hand up, I think. Or Susan, I'm sorry. What he said then. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Brandon, did you have a hand up? It does. He makes a point that you're supposed to pray to God in chapter 5, and that's true. He also says in chapter 1, ask God for wisdom. Okay? In this context, he's talking about for stuff. You're asking for something tangible, whatever that thing is. But I don't know. All right. There's another scripture here that I don't really want to talk about this morning, but in the next, I'll probably have to do it anyway. But he says, you adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Well, we take that and we take it everywhere and out of its context. But if you keep this in context, do you get tired of me saying that? But it's really the honest way to study the Bible. If you keep it in context, when you're in relationships that are difficult and you're having conflict, you can either listen to the worldly wisdom or the divine wisdom, and friendship with the world in this context means you're doing it like the world wants you to do it. Enmity with God is when you're friends of the world. Now, throughout Scripture, God is a jealous God. And if you're going to be really joined to Him, His friend, He doesn't want you to be joined with the world. He doesn't want you listening to the world. So he's talking about in this situation, whose friend are you going to be? You know? And then he says, and the next verse, I don't have it on the screen. He says, does the spirit which dwells in you long unto envy? Now, I was sitting with some men the other day and I said, this verse gives me pause. What in the world is he talking about? Does the spirit that dwells in you long unto envy? But if I go to this scripture right before it, friendship with the world is enmity with God. So God is a jealous God. And he's asking them, is God really jealous? And you say, well, yes, he is. And so you say to yourself, then if he really is jealous or envious over me, then I better not make him jealous by being a friend of who? The world. See? So then he says, God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. And as that beautiful lady over there said, you know, we need to be humble and vulnerable. And that's absolutely true. Okay? All right. So it's 10:13. To me, that's a good place So let's just let that be that, and then I'll save my voice to not scream at you or yell at you, but preach to you just a little bit further.